All right, folks, hour number 2 of the program. I'm Bob Tuskin. Shep's feeling a little bit under the weather. Let's jump right back into it. James Evan Pilato joining us, along now with Paul Verge of Divergentfilms. Paul, welcome. You guys are getting a chance to speak for the first time, although you guys have worked together and collaborated, and obviously both contribute to Tragedy and Hope and a lot of great stuff. This is a chance for you guys to meet each other officially and talk on air, which is kind of cool. So say hello.
Howdy, James.
How you doing, man? This is, I think, what's so fantastic about the technology and about the opportunities that we have right now is this amazing way that we can bring people together.
That's right.
Absolutely. And it's cool because James is a fellow West Coaster, so we're on the same vibe, kind of, all of us working our day job and then spending our extra time trying to put information out there that empowers and educates people.
Well, that's absolutely right. And the Intel Hub, of course, is based in the Northwest, so we have that vibe going. And they actually found our secret headquarters for that Southern Poverty Law Center article we were telling you about, which is kind of creepy. I wonder how they found that.
Yeah, I mean, those guys, their whole job is to basically create a somewhat... well, they're not really credible, actually, if you look into their history, but their whole job is to create smear campaigns that other media sources can then reference. And if you look at their arguments, even a lot of the arguments against the supremacist groups and stuff, they're mostly fallacious, mostly fallacy-based arguments. So, you can consider it a badge of honor to be labeled by them. I know We Are Change is on their list as well, and I'm friends with Luke Rudowski, and absolutely not an extremist by any stretch of the imagination. So if you can get on their list, then it must mean you're doing something to influence people. Otherwise, they wouldn't mention your name.
Yeah, we're wearing it as a badge of honor. It's not the worst thing. So there's a lot of things that we should talk about. James, have you been following what's going on in the Middle East at all?
I have, but in such a strange way. Again, with all of the technology, that on the one hand you feel so instantly connected to what's going on around the world, but you also feel so completely detached from it. And that until it's really, smacking you in the face here, for the most part it's like, hey, my power still works and I've got some food and the internet's up and things seem okay. And that's a bizarre feeling. But have I been following it? Absolutely. Every bit of minutia, there's just no time to do it.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to follow. I heard today that people are accusing the government psyops of going on Twitter and stirring up things there. And we talked about the CFR connection to some of this. And it's interesting, I keep an open mind. And in the news a couple weeks ago, we had Israel dropping bombs on the Palestinian settlements there. I don't think I get to speak about that enough. I'm actually missing out on talking with Alan Dershowitz. I don't know if you guys know who he is.
Oh, yeah.
He's at the University of Florida right now. I'm missing that so that I can be with you guys. I would love to confront him. Anyways, here we are.
I was going to say thank you for being here with us, but hopefully somebody is confronting him. I'm sure there'll be videos.
Leonard, not Leonard Horowitz. Dr. What's his name? Finkelstein.
No, Norm Finkelstein.
Norm Finkelstein. He confronted him. That was a great confrontation. Check that out if you Google Norm Finkelstein, Alan Dershowitz. All right, we'll be back in just a moment with Paul Verge and James Evan Pilato. Don't go anywhere, folks. This is the Intel Hub Radio on OracleBroadcasting.com. Welcome back to the Intel Hub Radio Show. I'm your host, Bob Tuskin. Our website, theintelhubradio.com. You can see all of our past guests and upcoming shows there. We're joined with Paul Verge of the Verge family. And as well as Paul Verge, we'll join now with our special guest, James Evan Pilato. And we're talking about, we're talking about everything. There's so many things to talk about that I don't like to limit ourselves based on topics. And I know that might get a little scattered, but I think all of these things connect, and there's, a big picture here that we have to look at, and we can't just focus on one aspect of it because then we'll get tunnel vision, and that's never good. One of the things that we talked about during the break, James and Paul, is this idea that we need to put out a resource for people to be able to navigate Netflix, which could actually be a tool in my eyes. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Paul, you want to take it?
Well, I think the idea of navigating Netflix is there's a lot of great films out there that offer a lot of information, but offering the information within context of other films and other work isn't necessarily provided for people. So what James and myself and Richard Grove and several others wanted to do was essentially watch a film and then gather together on a Skype call or something and record our conversation, kind of elucidating upon the film and offering, references and context and a lot of other things, so that people can get a fuller of an understanding of a film that they might watch on Netflix.
Interesting. And that includes telling people, which films to find that they might not necessarily find on Netflix. I've been able to find a lot of fascinating flicks on Netflix, including The House of Numbers. Have you guys been able to see that one yet?
Do they have that on Netflix?
They have that on Netflix. It's the documentary about the HIV/AIDS fraud, and it's an absolutely fascinating documentary. And that, as well as I saw a cool documentary with Ram Dass.
Oh yeah,
you guys know Ram Dass, right? Be Here Now.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
That was a really cool documentary. There's a lot of documentaries that I want to share with like-minded individuals such as yourselves. And this is a great idea, navigating Netflix. There's also films to stay away from in my mind. Films that are based on, logical fallacies and just a lack of research. I think we should look at everything with an open mind, but that being said, I think we should avoid some of the films that are not going to, maybe I'm missing something here. Paul, what do you think?
Well, I think, there's a tendency for people to hear other people's opinions, and they might say stay away, or this person worships the devil, or whatever the case may be, but a lot of time that could be shooting the messenger. And I find even the stuff that I don't agree with, I still like to consume somewhat, and it's a good exercise in critical thinking, especially something that is rich in fallacies. Then it's almost like an exercise for your mind, because you can watch a film from like 1934, like The House of Rothschild, which won the Academy Award, and if you have the contextual history of the Rothschild family, you can see what a brilliant piece of propaganda this film is. But if you don't, you might watch it and believe, oh wow, these Rothschild people were really benevolent. That's great. So I wouldn't avoid watching that film because it's propaganda, but it's interesting as a reflection of the kind of art as propaganda, or art imitating life as propaganda.
Right. That's what I was trying to say.
But
Exactly
I think James has some good recommendations for Netflix as well.
And I was going to say that this started out, navigating Netflix is just one of the many groups that you can find in the tragedyandhope.com community. And as I started to look at it, and I started to add a couple suggestions to the group, for whatever reason, the lightning bolt hit, and I was like, oh my God, I would love to do a show based around this. I come from college radio. I'm a huge film and music and media fan, and it's the thing I always kind of come back to. And for me, isn't it always ironic that the news is the thing that's supposed to tell us the truth, but it is half-truths and sometimes lies, and then the arts are supposed to be make-believe, but somehow there are more truths to be found within those stories.
Totally, and I was just going to say that it's funny, if a lot of people watch documentaries to get their sort of facts and perspectives and everything, but I think one of the most interesting experiments with the navigating Netflix idea will be to watch, non-documentaries and examine the symbolism and, the hidden kind of messages. Movies like The Matrix, maybe, I think that's been overanalyzed, but there's a lot of other movies. Yeah, Wizard of Oz, V for Vendetta. You can analyze these movies to look at not just the storyline they're presenting, but like the deeper context and the deeper.
Yeah.
There's a lot of symbolism, you know what I mean? Especially in great films, right? You can watch Citizen Kane, and if you know about William Randolph Hearst, that's a really, really interesting movie.
Didn't they put 9/11 in a lot of films on the clocks and in random places?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've seen YouTube videos looking into that, but
You think that's just a coincidence?
well, I mean, 911 has been in the public consciousness since the emergency number kind of was created back in the day, right? So I mean, if you look into numerology, there is some occult significance to those numbers, but I think we can go towards the tendency of kind of sliding past critical thinking and applying meaning to every single instance of 9/11 we come across, whereas the law of averages says there's going to be some coincidences, even though it's like, who's to determine, you know? When
How about this for a crazy coincidence? I had a listener call up the other day and say that if you add how old you're going to be next year with the year you were born, the last two numbers of that year. So I was born in 86. I'm going to be 25. 86 plus 25 equals 111. And everyone alive will get that number. How creepy is that?
I heard that from my good friend Clyde Lewis of GroundZeroMedia.org. I heard him mention that on his show, and yeah, I did it myself. I was like, oh my God, it does do that.
Did you get 111?
Yeah.
How about you, Paul? You get 111?
Absolutely. I actually did the math, and it's a kind of one of those neat math tricks. Like if you multiply 11 by any two-digit number, you just add the two numbers together, put it in the middle, and that's the answer, right? So 11 is one of those weird numbers. You know, in occult symbology, it means the beginning and the end, and it's one of those weird numbers that just has all these, you know, quote unquote magical mathematical properties. But that's a part of the quadrivium. So, you know, that's definitely a subject for a whole other show.
I would just also kind of quickly throw in here and mention back to the navigating Netflix idea and the, you know,
Yes.
documentaries versus narratives. I had a guy, you know, email me, and kind of, it was funny, he even asked the question, hey, do you have any ideas of things that I should watch on Netflix? It was like, funny you should ask. We're working on a show just, you know, about that. And after I sent him probably 4 documentary ideas and 4 narrative film ideas, I looked and realized that the documentaries were actually kind of more entertainment-y based, and the feature films and the narratives were actually had a lot more social commentary and a lot more going on.
Hey, we're coming up to our last break. Media Monarchy is his website. James Evan Pilato, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh man, thank you. My pleasure.
All right, folks, don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more. This is the Intel Hub Radio Show. I'm your host, Bob Tuskin. Chef's feeling a little bit under the weather. We'll be back with Paul Verge. This is Oracle Broadcasting.
Now, he's seeing a completely different world. Instead of that, he's seeing no independent thought. Consume, sleep, stay asleep, obey. When he looks at it with his eyes, it's what we see. When he looks at it with sunglasses, he's seeing the same things all the way through, the subliminal symbolically you couldn't see. Obey, no independent thought.
We're joined with Paul Verge. You're listening to the Intel Hub Radio Show. I'm Bob Tuskin. We're talking about learning. We're talking about Tragedy and Hope, a site that features this kind of learning. And, you know, it's all about being open-minded. It's all about critical thinking. These are all things that I know, Paul, you look at a lot. But why don't you tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself and how you got started? And was 9/11 the main thing for you, or does it go back further?
Well, actually, it's interesting you mentioned that, and we'll bring it full circle because you had that intro with David Icke speaking. But yeah, after 9/11, I kind of got interested in the dichotomy between these different Muslim groups. Because, you know, part of my family is Muslim, and they were telling me, you know, that not all Muslims get along. There's these different groups, and I saw the media pushing Bin Laden and Saddam Hussein as like buddies, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. So my brother lent me a David Icke book, and when I had crossed the border to go from Canada to the United States, as I chronicle in Hijacking Humanity, one of my films, the border guards seized the book and held me for 2 hours for questioning. And, you know, this book that I wasn't really going to take very seriously on 9/11, I ended up reading and fact-checking and trying to verify as much as I could to try and prove it wrong. And it ended up being more and more correct. So I started reading David Icke's work, which led to, you know, a whole host of other researchers, authors, filmmakers. And I decided to try and make some of my own films, started associating with groups in Vancouver like thinkfree.ca, and you know, once I went to New York in 2006 for the September 11th conference, and I met some really cool people like Luke and Dylan Avery and others, that kind of solidified the idea of making a film like Hijacking Humanity, which is meant to cross-pollinate all these different ideas from, you know, Bernaysian propaganda to the banking cartels to commerce and law and the whole legal personhood thing to false flag terrorism like 9/11, and put it all in one film. And it's all branched out from there because through making that film, I met guys like Richard Grove, Jan Irvin, Henry Macau, Maria Heller, and many others, and was able to actually get an interview with David Icke himself for my new film series, Believers Beware. So it's, since I started about 5 years ago, it's been a progression, but I've watched my education increase, my amount of learning increase, and I've more than anything realized how much I don't know, how much there is still to learn. So it keeps me hopefully in a mode of humility where I don't just outright dismiss new ideas. I try and investigate them impartially and give them some weight of critical thinking.
Well, that's the art of a good thinker, is somebody who understands that they do not know. They know that they do not know. I think that's one of the famous philosophers said that. And there's so many things out there that we need to keep an open mind about that on the surface may seem one way, but on closer inspection may be totally different. And if any of us close our minds, I think, it's said best with Robert Anton Wilson's work, The Cosmic Trigger. The belief, the second you say, I believe this, that's the destruction of any further thought. That's put yourself in a box. And I get out of all those boxes just like you do, Paul. And one of the great sites helping people learning the skills to get out of those boxes that you're featured at as a contributor, along with our previous guests, James Evan Pilato and James Corbett, as well as John Irvin, a good friend of ours. It's Tragedy and Hope. Tragedy and Hope just put out a new video giving a synopsis of what it's all about, where Richard Grove talks about all the different features, the premises of Tragedy and Hope, how it got its name from the Carroll Quigley book, and on and on and on. Paul, tell us more about this amazing project.
Well, back in, actually not long after Hijacking Humanity came out, Richard and Lisa, his fiancée, had been nurturing this idea of trying to create either an online magazine or a kind of community that we could attract more and more artists and researchers and people like James and Maria Heller and Brett Venot and Jan Irvin and others to kind of unify under our common ground, our common messages. We all have differing ideas and beliefs that we subscribe to, but we agree on so much common ground that we decided it would be like forming a chorus of singers as opposed to trying to sing by ourselves. And the result has been nothing short of amazing. In the last 2 years, we've watched our community grow, and all really good quality people who come in for fear-free, logical discussions. They're quote unquote subscribed to a higher awareness in terms of they're not seeking to go out and troll sites. They're going to seeking real learning, a real education, as opposed to just kind of being spoon-fed what to think. They appreciate that Tragedy and Hope is trying to show you how to think properly, how to think critically using this ordered methodology called the Trivium.
Be an autodidact. What's the word?
Autodidact. An autodidactic learner means somebody who learns for themselves, who is able to self-learn. So essentially an autodidact could teach themselves auto mechanics or how to fix a computer by going through the steps and logically following the grammar, and then they could actually, once they've mastered that skill, they could use their rhetoric then to teach someone else that skill. So the Trivium in that regard is a very useful tool in not only critically thinking and identifying logical fallacies, but in helping you become autodidactic so that you can teach yourself anything that you want. And that removes a huge layer of uncertainty from our lives, because one of the things we come across is our dependencies. We depend on so many other people, and there's a lot of conveniences offered to make us lose our independency. And when you have the Trivium, you actually gain a lot of your independency back because you're no longer afraid of the unknown.
It gives you a self-esteem, it gives you this control, if you will, not in a negative way, but in a way in which it empowers you with the tools of thinking. And we'll be having more shows on this topic. But one of the main points of the Trivium that people need to look at is critical thinking and inductive versus deductive reasoning. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I think everybody's born with a kind of version of inductive critical thinking. That's where, if you burn your hand on a plate when you're 2 years old, you're probably going to remember not to touch that plate again because
man, that hurt.
you've learned. And so that's kind of built into all of us as human beings, which thank goodness, Whereas the deductive version is something that people develop an understanding of more around the age of puberty, as Gino Dennings talked about, understanding this trivium-based method of critical thinking, which is essentially analyzing the grammar, using the logic to remove all contradictions, and then using the art of rhetoric to communicate the idea that you've now gained, logic and understanding from. So if you're to go forward and apply this methodology of critical thinking that is complementary to your inductive version of critical thinking that we all have, then what it is like a super virus scanner for your mind. So when you're watching the news or you're getting afflicted by corporate advertising, it no longer is able to burrow itself into your subconscious mind as effectively because you've now got this kind of filter that allows that stuff to be discarded in the trash bin of your mind.
And your mind is like a computer, if you will. It's constantly uploading information. And if you upload information that you take for granted, if you allow the programming of the mainstream media to consume your thoughts, then of course, folks, you're going to be brainwashed into thinking that war is good or whatever it may be, that the chemtrails are normal. It goes on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
They're putting fluoride in our water supply. There's so many things to talk about. When we come back after this quick break, we'll be back with Paul Verge and more on the Intel Hub Radio Show. I'm your host, Bob Tuskin. The websites, theintelhubradio.com and theintelhub.com. Don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back. The Intel Hub Radio Show. Bob Tuskin and Paul Verge talking about education, talking about critical thinking, talking about having the tools in these serious times to deal with whatever comes down the road. And Paul, intellectual defensism? What were you telling me?
Intellectual self-defense.
Intellectual self-defense. Say that 5 times fast.
Totally. And it's essentially, we teach ourselves all these different defensive kind of maneuvers, whether it's, martial arts or whatever. But for our mind, a lot of times we just kind of take in everything and we don't really apply that high standard of critical thinking. And, in the end, that's all that deception going unchecked is what causes the majority of the problems in the world. So if you can arm yourself with a form of intellectual self-defense, like the trivium-based method of critical thinking, you can go out into the world and, not be deceived, be certain of your decisions, and find that satisfaction that you're looking for, because we can externalize all the problems. There is this giant elitist hierarchy trying to, enslave us, but ultimately that is only happening because we haven't done enough to stop that flow from happening. So the real change starts from us first, within ourselves, to educate ourselves, to learn how to effectively educate others, and then when enough people know what's going on, we just all stop giving our power and our energy to the system that's abusing us.
A lot of us have been robbed by that system, and it starts with our education system. The Prussian education system sort of gives people this compulsory, education in which they're just told to repeat something, and that's the right answer, and then they test, implying that everyone's equal. There's a lot of things we can talk about when it comes to education that I know both of us are very interested in, and I know a lot of our listeners are interested in. And you work at times with the School Sucks podcast. What a great podcast that is, right?
Yeah, Brett Fanot, I came to it through Richard and Jan were fans, and also through Stefan Molyneux's Free Domain Radio. But the School Sucks podcast, man, Brett articulates, what's wrong with not just the education system, but how just our viewpoints towards children and youth in general is really, one of the major causes of how we imprint all this negative conditioning onto this next generation, and then wonder why there's such conflicts, you know what I mean? So I would definitely recommend people check out his podcast, Brett Fanot's School Sucks podcast.
And check out that valedictorian talk that girl gave. How cool was that?
Yeah, Erica Goldson. She is really cool, and especially for someone so young, she's learned a lot of great wisdom in such a short time, and she was brave enough to share it with everyone, you know?
This has nothing to do with age. The kids that learn the Trivium, they get this stuff. This is something that I think transcends age. It has to do with the mind, levels. And you know, this is something that is another example of how people from all spectrums of life seek enlightenment, if you will.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, right? Like you said, age doesn't really matter, and I think it's really that Erica was able to select the right books to read, to get some perspectives that were a little outside the mainstream, but that, you know, she's very clearly an educated speaker and someone who knew what she was talking about in terms of the experience she had just gone through with high school and that kind of form of education, compulsory. So, you know, I'm glad that her video, the valedictorian speech, has gotten so much publicity, because it needs to not only get there to show older people that the youth are thinking, but to also show the other youth that thinking is cool. That you can read books and think about things deeply, not just shallowly, and it's actually cool to do that.
But thinking is not cool, Paul, because the guy that asked Penn and Teller about Building 7, well, we should chant tase him, because he's making us think about a subject matter that's not Dancing with the Stars or, the Jersey Shore.
Well, yeah, the idea of groupthink is it's pernicious, and it continues. And, one person trying to educate a crowd, it's a thin line between them being with you and them wanting to go after you. So all you can do is learn to, the art of persuasive rhetoric. Learn to communicate your ideas in a responsible way.
The art of persuasive thinking. The art of, what's really going on. There's the Quadrivium, which talks about the arts a bit. Paul, are you with us? Did you drop? Yeah, I think you did drop. Well, that's quite all right, folks, because there's plenty to talk about, and we will take calls with Paul for the last segment of tonight's program. So you can call us at the Oracle Broadcasting call-in line at 1-866-841-1065. Get out your crayon, write this down. That's 866-841-1065. And we're talking with Paul Verge of Divergentfilms. Talking a little bit about the Trivium, the education system. And as always, we're interested in hearing your thoughts about what solutions we have, Paul. Everybody wants to talk about the problems with the education system or with our government or geopolitics, but not everybody wants to talk about what we can do about it. And usually that's the sign in my eyes of somebody who's a real person who's doing this for more than just fear and hype, and somebody who is interested in just doing this for the fame or the propaganda. What are your real motives in presenting this information? That's what we have to ask ourselves. What are the people's true intentions when they present this stuff? Are people interested in presenting these ideas for the sake of the ideas? Or are we, obsessed with the Charlie Sheen celebrity mentality and, the, aesthetics and the messenger? That's one of the number one fallacies, Paul, is to go after the messenger, right?
Absolutely. And sorry I dropped out there for a second.
No, not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, if I can make a point about Charlie Sheen, because I've seen a lot of perspectives kind of being put out there.
All right, here we go. Controversial, folks. This is what our listeners like. This will get the ratings up. Paul Verge on Charlie Sheen. Here we go. Here's a YouTube clip. And action.
Okay, well, think about the possibility that Charlie Sheen and his other representative right now, which is AJ from Infowars.com.
Who's that?
Alex Jones?
I'm just joking. Get him off my show. Why does he keep coming up?
He's one of those presences that you just can't deny exists. But to make a point, those guys are both really good at getting PR. Like, they know what buttons to push in order to get any kind of coverage. And I would point to the story of Macbeth from Shakespeare, where Macbeth, or is it Macbeth or Hamlet? I'm going to get confused here. But where the character pretends to be insane in order to throw off the authorities who think that if he knows what's going on, they're going to go after him. So entertain the idea that Charlie Sheen may very well be on, manic or crazy or whatever, but also entertain the idea that he may be giving the performance of his lifetime so that he's able to not only get all this publicity, but to get a whole bunch of ideas out there that are controversial that normally he wouldn't be able to say if they were considering him as quote-unquote sane. Whereas when he's already got this label on him as insane, he can go out and say whatever he wants, including some truth.
Is that a good thing, though? Do we want people to associate these ideas with crazy people?
No, definitely not. And I think that's the one negative side of the coin, is that, if he says enough negative things and, people employ the guilt by association fallacy, then yes, I can see where someone could be like, oh, you're a 9/11 truther, just like crazy Charlie Sheen, and then dismiss you. But then that person would be identifying that they're using fallacy tactics, and that gives you the opportunity to call them out on that and try and bring more substance to their argument as opposed to just dismissing you. So, in that regard, it's like, I'm proud to say that I'm watching the whole Charlie Sheen thing with a smile on my face, because even if he is coming from a place where he's really unhealthy, it's almost like the dude in Network who just finally blows a cork and he just decides to just shout out the truth as he sees it, no matter what the cost is. And, he's mad as hell and he's not going to take it anymore. And that ignites this firestorm of righteous indignation amongst people. So, I've never seen Alex Jones on The View before, and because of this Charlie Sheen thing, he's on there, explaining all this stuff, which is going to bring in this other mainstream audience to this information.
That's true. And did you see that on one of the websites they took out the word Building 7? They made it sound like he was saying they just blow up buildings, and they took out the 7 part. And, I agree. When I confronted Penn and Teller, that might not have been as great as I would have wanted it to be. Granted that I had to force my question in there as I was being heckled and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But, the idea that Penn and Teller, or Penn, went on his Facebook and his Twitter account talking about Building 7 afterwards to over 1 million plus followers of his, sheeple of his, mm-hmm. that at least hopefully opened the doorway for them to go watch the footage of Building 7. So piercing through the veil is important, and we do have to branch beyond the choir. Preaching to the choir is something that I think we need to get beyond. And let's talk a little bit more about that after this last break of the show. Paul, time flies. Let's be here now in the moment, and we'll be back in just a moment on the other side of this break. You're listening to the Intel Hub radio show on oraclebroadcasting.com. Alrighty, final segment, the Intel Hub radio show. And we're talking with Paul Verge of Divergentfilms and the Verge family. And we're talking about Charlie Sheen. We brought him up. Yeah, I know. Geez, I know you're probably sick of it like I am. But, it's important that we plant seeds. And, Paul, why don't we elaborate a little bit on this analogy?
Yeah, well, to transition from Charlie Sheen, essentially, even if he's is crazy, he's still, through his rants, is planting some seeds in the minds of people who wouldn't ordinarily come across a lot of this information. So I think that's the most responsible thing we can do, as we're educating ourselves, and we still want to share information even though we haven't fully educated ourselves. No one knows, everything that's going on, but we still want to communicate what we think we know. And so planting seeds of smaller ideas, not necessarily forcing someone to try and see the whole big picture all at once, which can be overwhelming to people.
Well, you got to start somewhere. And Here's the thing, though, all right? And I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me. At the water fountain the other day, I was drinking some water because I forgot my fluoride-free water, so I went to the water fountain. I was exercising. Got to stay hydrated. So a little fluoride, I guess, is...
good for your teeth, right?
Yeah, right. So anyways, the guy next to me at the water fountain, I say, what do you think about this fluoride in our water? He looks at me and he says, it's good for you. Mm-hmm. I said, well, what is your source on that? Why do you say that? He says, look, buddy, leave me alone. And he takes this tone like he's offended that I even say anything. How dare you talk about my water being poisoned? How dare you tell me we're both being poisoned as we drink some water and try to enjoy some exercise. Okay? And then he proceeds to, heighten up his tone with me and, threatens me and says, hey, screw you, and, he goes on and on. So the point is that if you can't even talk to your neighbors and plant a seed about an issue like fluoride, no wonder you can't talk about 9/11 and that creates such an emotional response. No wonder you can't talk about any of these things. So it's almost like, what baby steps do we need to give people? What seeds do we need to plant in which these people are going to break free from their conditioning? It's got to start somewhere. It's kind of the troubling thing is, what issue is the best issue to do that with? I don't know, and I don't know if anybody else does as well.
Well, I think that you can find a relevance to a certain situation, right? Like, if you happen to be talking about terrorism, then you could bring up the idea of false flags and just, you don't have to make impart of your position necessarily, as ask other people what their positions are and kind of get a flavor for where people are at in terms of their education, and then you'll know what seed in your arsenal to try and plant, right? And, there's a thing about planting seeds. You don't just, drop a seed, kick some dirt on it, and walk away. You got to water it from time to time. You got to make sure you dig into the soil a bit, and don't just leave it on the surface, but plant it in a deeper way.
And how about this for an analogy? It has to be the right season.
Well, that's true. I think, people, if somebody is already annoyed with something and you try and bring up something that's going to challenge their paradigm, like this gentleman who was at the water fountain with you, on another day, he might be more receptive to that information. But in that day where he had been working out or whatever, and he's just at the water fountain, it'd be like if you're at a urinal or something and somebody's like, so how about that 9/11 and that bin Laden? I guess you could have a conversation there, but it might feel a little awkward, right? So like you said, timing is everything, and then knowing which seed to plant, how far down to plant it. But the key thing is once you do plant that seed, it's there. It's embedded in that person, and you don't know who is going to come along later on and water it. They might even water it unknowingly. And
Good point.
Hundreds of people that I've talked with at the beginning of my journey, I've watched them come around, and not all of them come around at the same pace or the same time, but it's something in their own life that they come across, some piece of media that they see in the right context. Suddenly, all the seeds that I've planted throughout the years suddenly start blooming at different times, and it comes back to me.
Isn't that amazing?
It's encouraging as heck, man.
They come back to you and they say, hey, Bob, hey, Paul, that thing you said about the Federal Reserve, hey, I've been thinking about it. And you're like, wow, man.
Yeah,
it gives you this sense of, feeling intuitively that you're on the right path, and that, when other people start to see this, it makes you feel good. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, I describe it as, spiritually fulfilling in that you're trying to raise each other's consciousness. You're trying to raise each other's vibration, I guess you could say. And through proper education that's not based on fear, but based on empowerment, you can do that. You're essentially infecting other people with consciousness and trying to get them to a higher place of understanding. Because once we all get to a place where we're communicating in a conscious and nonviolent way, we're going to make so much progress. It's the root cause of all these conflicts is the way we communicate with each other is domination based. It's mostly conflictual. We're competing with each other. We're always trying to communicate with our judgments and our prejudices. And because of that, it doesn't allow a lot of progress to get made, because we're stuck in that kind of status quo.
Let's talk about nonviolent communication for a little bit. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I recently was able to watch Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication videos on YouTube, which there's an abundance of them for free. And we actually did an episode of the Peace Revolution podcast where Richard Grove, Lisa Arbucheski, myself, and one of my business partners, Robert Christie, we talked about nonviolent communication. And the idea is this. You're trying to get at the root of somebody's needs and their feelings, and letting go of the judgments and all the baggage that you have attached to someone or some idea, so that in communicating with them, you can identify each other's needs, each other's feelings around those needs, and actually try and fulfill those needs for each other without... It's about finding win-win scenarios, as opposed to the status quo, which states for every person who wins, someone must lose. And so it requires you to communicate a little more creatively and a little less judgmentally, but the end result is the person you're talking to actually listens to what you're saying. It's this amazing thing, because you're trying to communicate what you think their needs and feelings are, and then suddenly they're like, hey, you're putting yourself in my shoes. I appreciate that, so now I'm going to try and put myself in your shoes, and then you appreciate that, and then look what you've got. You've got this dialogue going where 5 minutes ago you hated each other, and now you're actually listening to each other.
I need to learn how to do this. Everybody tells me I'm an abrasive, angry, crazy conspiracy guy. I need to learn about this.
Well, it's just one of the aspects of proper rhetoric. I think it's important to note that the word rhetoric is usually said in a negative connotation, but all rhetoric really means is to communicate, to have the wisdom to communicate. And so there's deceptive rhetoric, which is that's the politicians and the CEOs and the news media. And then there's persuasive positive rhetoric where, you're communicating an idea clearly without offending somebody's sensibilities, and they're actually listening and hearing what you're saying and applying their critical thinking to it. So I think, when we're trying to communicate these big ideas, these conspiratorial ideas, to find the best way to plant a seed without it being rejected is to use nonviolent communication. And
don't forget fallacy begone spray.
Yeah, I posted a link there for you in Skype, so you can put that up if you want. But that fallacy be gone commercial I did for What You've Been Missing, episode 1, exposing the noble lie, which you can find on YouTube if you just type in WYBM, or if you go to tragedyandhope.com, you can see what you've been missing there. But
best first episode I think I've ever seen of a new series, and there's more to come. All right, let's take a quick call, Paul. We have a caller on the line. Area code 408. Real quick, what's your question or comment for Paul Verge?
Yeah, this is Joey, and I'm calling about anytime you mention consciousness or DMT or any of that stuff, people immediately think, New Age movement or something. That's an idea of the Illuminati or the Freemasons or something. Could you comment on that or something?
Okay, yeah, no problem, sir. Stand by. Real quick on entheogens. We talk a little bit about that on Truth Frequency Radio, another show. It's something that's something we should look at, right, Paul? But with the tools of the Trivium and logic, because you can't do it from a place, I think, of naivety or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea of consciousness and psychedelics and entheogens, they kind of tie together, because there's this whole notion that we're these conscious beings who have the potential for a higher or deeper understanding of how things work. And having tried entheogens myself, I can honestly attest firsthand that it does take you into an altered state of consciousness where you see things completely differently, but not in a negative way. You come to a lot of realizations. You realize you have this thing called an ego, and you experience what's called ego death, where your consciousness kind of melts away.
Ego be gone spray.
Ego be gone, exactly.
Hey, Paul Verge, it's been a great program. Thanks so much. Why don't you give out your links real quick?
Yeah, tragedyandhope.com, hijackinghumanity.com, Divergentfilms.com, and thinkfree.ca. And I would just say, investigate things that you're told are occultist, and investigate things that you're told not to look at, and do it with an open mind, objectively, non-judgmental.
Well, the definition of occult is hidden, and we should put light on all of these hidden topics, and I thank you for doing that. Folks, this has been the Intel Hub Radio Show. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Stay tuned. Oracle Broadcasting, Lee Rogers coming up next.
Warning, this ad may contain misleading and unfounded rhetoric.
New Fallacy Be Gone Critical Thinking Spray.
Are you tired of soulless corporate advertising, shallow debates between puppet politicians, and the empty rhetoric of a ruling elite? Wishing that your opinions and the ideas of others actually made some kind of sense, instead of sounding like some bandwagon-hopping jingoistic nonsense? Looking to sound like your factual positions on the banking crisis are well thought out and articulate, rather than coming from an emotionally compromised bundle of tears and fears?
Then you need Fallacy Be Gone, the only critical thinking spray available in the world. Fallacy Be Gone destroys not 20, not 30, not even 40, but it obliterates these 42 fallacies. Fallacies like, ad hominem. I don't like what you're saying. You're crazy. Ad hominem, okay. Appeal to authority. But the president said so. Appeal to belief. Appeal to common practice. Everybody's doing it. Appeal to consequences of the belief. Appeal to emotion. You feel guilty. Appeal to fear. Appeal to flattery. They can get today, douchebag. Appeal to novelty. Appeal to pity. But please, my 7 million bonus. Appeal to popularity. Appeal to ridicule. Just another conspiracy theorist. Appeal to spite. Appeal to the bandwagon. Issue the Canucks. We're going all the way to stand the cup. Any questions? questionable cause. You're clumsy because I cursed you. As it happened, burden of proof. You could be wrong, so I'm right. Subject to anomaly. Opposition. Cat and colorless atoms must be colorless. Confusing cause and effect. False dilemma. You are either with us or you are with the purists. Division. Gambit fallacy. Genetic fallacy. Those agents are so good at math, ignoring a common law. Middle ground. By association. Muslim? You mean terrorist? Misleading visitors. Basic generalization. Terrorist? You mean Muslim? Poisoning the well. Personal attack. Your mother was a hamster and your father smelled it all the bellies. Post hoc. Red herring. Hey, did you see that wild goose run through that smoke screen? Relativist fallacy. Slippery slope. Let's decrease privacy to increase security. Special treatment. Spotlight. Those naked body scanners are a great idea. The straw man argument. And two wrongs make a right. An eye for an eye, mofo.
Powered by quadrimethyltryptamine, a DMT entheogen, Fallacy Be Gone gets rid of fallacies so fast you'll think you're eating a red herring while begging the question to create a false dilemma between a straw man and his bandwagon. So, get Fallacy Be Gone Critical Thinking Spray today and start making sense of tomorrow.